Raymond Earl Hutchins had been a mechanic for 38 years, and in 38 years, he had learned that a car tells you the truth if you know how to listen. Not metaphorically, literally. The engine has a voice, and the voice changes when something is wrong, and the change is specific. A particular knock at a particular RPM range, a hesitation under load that is different from a hesitation at idle, a vibration at highway speed that is not present at 40 and is diagnostic if you know what you are looking for. Raymond knew what he was looking for. He had known for 38 years. He had learned from his uncle Louis Hutchins, who had run a shop in East Baltimore for 41 years, and who had told Raymond at 17 when Raymond started sweeping floors and handing tools and watching Listen First. The car will tell you. Your job is to hear it correctly. Louis Hutchins had opened his shop in 1961 on a street in East Baltimore that had been redlined the decade before, and that had consequently developed its own economy of black-owned businesses that served the community the broader economy was refusing to serve. Louis had understood from the first day he turned the lights on in that bay that he was not just opening a shop. He was providing a service that the community needed and that no one else in the district was providing with the combination of skill and trustworthiness that the community deserved. He had kept his prices fair and his work correct and his word reliable for 41 years, and the shop had outlasted the redlining and the urban renewal projects, and 3 recessions, and 1 flood, and had remained until Louis retired the place people brought cars they cared about. Raymond had spent 4 years in that shop before the Army, 4 years of learning the vocabulary of engines, the grammar of systems, the specific syntax of what causes what, and in what order, and what happens if you ignore it. He had come back from 3 years of Army service with a different relationship to maintenance and function, which was the understanding earned through operational contexts that systems that are not maintained correctly fail at the worst possible time, and that the person responsible for the maintenance is the person responsible for the failure. He had taken that understanding back to Louis's shop for 2 more years, and then at 25 had begun the process that ended 11 years later in his own shop on Meridian Road, building the client base first, because clients are not accumulated in a year, and then the building, and then the equipment, and then the license, and then the staff. Raymond was 63 years old, compact and precise in the way that people who work with their hands become precise over long years. Not a wasted motion, not an approximate gesture. Everything in the right place at the right time. Because the right place and the right time are not arbitrary in a shop where a tool left on the wrong surface costs you 20 minutes, and in some cases cost you a hand. He wore his hair close-cropped and his coveralls clean at the start of each day, because his Uncle Louis had worn his coveralls clean at the start of each day and had told Raymond that a mechanic who does not respect his own uniform does not respect the work. And Raymond had agreed and had adopted the standard and had required it of his employees as well. The coveralls might be dirty by noon. They were always clean at opening. The shop floor was swept every morning before the first vehicle arrived. The tools were returned to their positions at the end of every day. These were not formal policies, they were the standard. The standard was Raymond. He had his own shop on Meridian Road, Hutchins Auto Service, 22 years at the same address, a building he owned outright since year 14, having purchased it from the original owner with a loan he had paid off in 6 years. He had 4 employees, a full parts inventory, a dealer repair license that had been current for 19 years, and a reputation in the district that was the only kind of advertising he had ever used. Because people who have a car they care about ask other people who care about their cars, and those people had been asking about Raymond Hutchins for a long time. He had a certificate of commendation from the state licensing board for compliance. He had been a member of the Neighborhood Business Association for 19 years. He had built the shop the way he built everything correctly in the right order without shortcuts 1 year at a time. He had served 3 years in the Army as a wheeled vehicle mechanic, which was where the instincts Louis had given him became formalized into doctrine and procedure and field verification. and which was where he had learned the relationship between maintenance and function. The understanding that the thing works correctly if and only if the maintenance is done correctly, and that the maintenance is done correctly only if you do not take shortcuts, and that you do not take shortcuts when you understand what the shortcuts cost. He had carried that understanding out of the Army and into the shop and had built a business on it. The car he was driving on a Thursday morning in September was a 1969 Corvette Stingray in Monza. Red. A vehicle that had been in the possession of Dr. William Osei for 7 years, which William had inherited from his father, and which he treated with the specific devotion of someone who understands that the object is not just an object, but a history. William's father, Dr. Emmanuel Osei, had purchased the Corvette in 1974 from a dealer in the western part of the state, driving it home on a summer Saturday and parking it in the garage of the Chestnut Hill house with the particular satisfaction of someone who has worked for a specific thing for a long time and has finally obtained it. Emmanuel had been a physician internal medicine, 34 years of practice, a man who had completed his medical training in Ghana and then his residency in London and then his fellowship in the United States, and who had built a practice from nothing in a city that did not automatically make room for him, and had made room by being excellent, which was the only currency that worked in all circumstances. He had worked hard enough that by 1974 he could buy the car he had seen in a showroom in 1969 and had wanted from the moment he saw it, and he had bought it and driven it home, and had maintained it for 27 years until his death, at which point the car had passed to William, who was an emergency medicine physician and who drove it 3 times a year and had it serviced twice a year and treated it the way his father had treated it, carefully correctly, with the understanding that the thing is worth having only if you are willing to care for it as it deserves to be cared for. William had been bringing the car to Raymond for 5 years. He had come to Raymond through a referral from a colleague whose husband had a vintage vehicle and who had said, "If you want someone who will treat that car the way it should be treated, call Raymond Hutchins on Meridian Road." William had called. Raymond had done the inspection. Raymond had told William exactly what the car needed and why, and what it would cost if he waited, and William had said, "I'll do everything now." That was the beginning of a professional relationship that had evolved over 5 years into something closer to the relationship his father had had with his mechanic in the 70s, built on reliability and trust, and the specific confidence that the person you were leaving the car with understood exactly what they were responsible for and took that responsibility seriously. The car had come to Raymond 6 days ago with a carburetor that needed rebuilding and brake pads that were down to the wear indicator and a rear differential that had developed a noise at speed that William had described on the intake form as a whine that starts at 55 and gets worse above 65. Raymond had taken the car apart with the same attention he gave every car that came through the bay, and he had found, in addition to the 3 identified issues, a fuel line that was showing hairline cracking at the firewall connection, and a distributor cap that was a year past its service interval. He had called William, who had said, "Do everything. Just do it right." Raymond had done everything. The carburetor had been rebuilt with correct replacement parts, sourced from a specialty supplier in Ohio, not generic components, because a 1969 engine deserved correct parts, and Raymond would not put generic components in a vehicle he was being trusted with. The brakes had been replaced front and rear. The differential had been repacked. The fuel line had been replaced at the firewall. The distributor cap had been replaced. The car had been aligned and the tire pressures had been set to the manufacturer specification. Raymond had spent 6 days on this car, and he was satisfied with the result, which was his standard. Not the customer's standard, not a general industry standard, but his own. Before calling a customer to say a car was ready, Raymond road tested it. This was the final verification. It was also a legal requirement of his dealer repair license for vehicles exceeding a specified repair value, which this vehicle had exceeded on the first day of the estimate. The road test was documented on the work order. The dealer plate was mounted on the rear of the Corvette. Raymond carried, as he always carried on road tests, the work order with the customer's name and contact information, his dealer repair license card, his own personal license, and the shop's insurance documentation. He had carried these documents on road tests for 19 years. He had never been asked for them in the context of a problem. He had offered them once to an officer who had admired the car and had wanted to know who was driving it. And the officer had said, "Beautiful machine," and Raymond had agreed, and that had been all. He had carried the documents because it was correct to carry the documents, not because he expected to need them. This was the distinction that mattered. You carried them because the situation required them, not because you anticipated trouble. If you carried documentation in anticipation of trouble, the documentation became a response to fear, and Raymond did not run his shop from fear. He ran it from standard. The standard required the documentation. The documentation was there. He had also, 19 years ago, when he first obtained the dealer repair license, read the state statutes governing dealer repair operations in full. He had a law degree's worth of comprehension, was not his background. He was a mechanic, not an attorney, but he understood the relevant provisions well enough to know what the license permitted and what it required and what his obligations were on a road test. He knew the plate requirements. He knew the documentation requirements. He knew that a dealer repair plate on a vehicle being operated by the licensed dealer or the dealer's employee for the purpose of verifying completed repairs was a legitimate plate for a legitimate operation, and that no reasonable officer applying reasonable scrutiny to the documentation he was carrying would find a basis for any concern. He had known this for 19 years. He had carried the documentation for 19 years. On the morning of the September stop, he had the documentation on the seat and had offered it within 90 seconds. He had done everything correctly. This was not remarkable. Correct was not remarkable. Correct was the baseline. What was remarkable was that correct had not been sufficient to prevent what had happened. That was the thing. That was the record. That was what Patricia Sims had filed and what the review board had received and what the finding had confirmed. The correct thing had been done. The incorrect response to it had been documented. Both were now part of the record. He drove the Corvette onto Meridian Road and turned north toward the stretch of road he used for highway speed testing, a 4-mile run on Beaumont Parkway, with a long enough straight section to get the car to 65 and hold it for 90 seconds, which was what the differential issue required. The September morning was clear and cool, the kind of morning that is good for road testing because the air is dense and the engine runs clean and the sounds are identifiable. He held the car at 35 through the neighborhood streets, feeling the transmission, which he had not touched, but which was now communicating through the drive line in a way that was slightly different from the intake, slightly freer, and listening for the differential, which was quiet at this speed as it should be. He turned onto Beaumont Parkway and brought the car up to 60. The differential was quiet at 60. He brought it to 65, still quiet. He held it at 67 for 90 seconds. The differential was quiet. He held it there and he listened the way he had been listening for 38 years. Not just with his ears, but with his hands on the wheel and his right foot on the gas, and his awareness distributed across every system the car was communicating through. The Corvette was telling him the truth. The truth was that the work had been done correctly. He had known it in the bay. The road confirmed it. The brakes were responsive when he tested them at the end of the run, which told him the front calipers were functioning at the specification and that the pad compound he had selected was bedding correctly in the September temperature. The carburetor was feeding at the correct fuel-to-air ratio, which he could feel through the throttle response. Smooth. Linear, no hesitation at any point in the RPM range, which meant the rebuilt float valve was seated correctly and the needle and seat were doing what they were supposed to do. The engine was running at the precise RPM level that a properly calibrated carburetor on a healthy 350 cubic inch engine was supposed to produce. Not approximately, precisely. Raymond did not do approximately. He had not done approximately in 38 years. Approximately was what you got when you were close to correct. Approximately was not what you brought to a customer's car. The car was correct. Raymond drove it through the confirmation in the way he always did, methodically in the sequence the work order required, noting each result in the specific part of his mind that he used for this purpose, the part that would produce a complete oral report when William arrived at 4 o'clock and said, "Tell me everything you did." Then he turned back toward Meridian Road. He was on Ashby Street, which ran through the residential section of the Whitmore neighborhood, when he saw the cruiser's lights in the rearview mirror. He noted the time. It was 8:47 in the morning. He pulled to the side of the road carefully because he was driving someone else's car, and he did not pull someone else's car hard to the curb, turned off the engine, and placed his hands on the steering wheel in the position where they were visible through the driver's window. He had been doing this for 38 years because his Uncle Lewis had told him at 17, when an officer stops you, your hands are on the wheel and they can see your hands. That is not optional. That is the procedure. Raymond had made it the procedure. He did not have to think about it. He thought about it anyway, the way you think about something that has become part of your body. Not to remind yourself, but because the thinking is itself part of the preparation, the way a runner thinks about form even when the form is already correct. He looked in the rear-view mirror at the cruiser. He noted the unit number on the door. He noted the time again. He thought, I have the work order, the dealer license, my personal license, and the insurance card. He ran through the documents in order the way he ran through a checklist before a road test, because the checklist was the thing that prevented the things you forgot. The officer came to the driver's window. He was young, mid to late 20s, with the energy of someone who has identified a situation and has a theory about it. His name tag said Yates. Officer Derek Yates, 29 years old, 3 years of patrol experience, standing on the Ashby Street sidewalk looking at a man he had not expected to see driving this car through this neighborhood at this time on a Thursday morning. Yates had not yet asked himself why that expectation had been formed. He was operating on the expectation without examining it, which was the specific error that 3 years of patrol experience had not yet corrected in him. The error was not rare. It was common enough that it had a name in the literature, but Yates had not read the literature, and the error operated in him without a name, which made it harder to identify and harder to stop. Yates said, license and registration. Raymond said, officer, I want to tell you that I am a licensed mechanic, and this vehicle belongs to a customer of mine and is being returned to him after a repair. I have the work order, my dealer repair license, and the vehicle owner's contact information. My personal license is in my wallet in my back pocket. May I reach for it? Yates said, step out of the vehicle. Raymond said, I'm happy to step out. I'm also happy to provide the documentation I mentioned, which will explain why I'm driving this car. I have everything you need on the seat beside me. Yates said, step out of the vehicle. Now, Raymond stepped out. He stood on the Ashby Street sidewalk with his hands visible at his sides, which was the procedure and had always been the procedure. He was wearing his work clothes, dark blue coveralls with the Hutchins Auto Service logo on the chest pocket, the name Raymond embroidered below it. He was 63 years old and compact and stood with the particular stillness of someone who has nothing to hide and knows exactly what the documentation says and is waiting with complete patience for the opportunity to provide it. Yates said, whose car is this? Raymond said, the car belongs to Dr. William Osei, who is a customer of mine. I can give you his phone number. I have the work order for the repair in the car. The dealer plate on the rear is registered to Hutchins Auto Service at 1850 Meridian Road, which is my business. I have held a dealer repair license for 19 years. Yates said, I'm going to need you to step to the sidewalk while I run this. Raymond stepped to the sidewalk. He watched Yates go back to the cruiser. He understood what was happening, and he understood it clearly and without confusion because he had 63 years of clarity on this particular kind of situation. He was a black man standing on a sidewalk in a residential neighborhood while an officer ran the plate on a red Corvette that he had been driving correctly and that was registered to a dealer plate that would trace to his own shop. The plate would trace correctly. The license was current. Everything was in order. He thought about the documentation on the seat. The work order had William Osei's name, address, phone number, and signature. His own dealer repair license had his name, address, and shop address and was current through the following March. He had offered this documentation. It had not been accepted. He stood with his hands visible and he waited. After 7 minutes, Yates came back. He said the plate comes back to a repair shop. Raymond said Hutchins Auto Service. That is my shop. I am Raymond Earl Hutchins. The vehicle on the work order is this vehicle, year, make, model, and VIN. I can hand you the work order from the front seat. Yates said I've called for a second unit. Raymond said I understand. While we wait, I'd like to give you the work order and the dealer license and the vehicle owner's contact information so that you have the full picture. May I reach into the car for the documents? Yates said wait for the second unit. Raymond said I understand, I'll wait. He waited. His hands were at his sides. The September morning was clear and cool, and the leaves on the ash trees that lined Ashby Street were beginning to consider turning the first signs of color at the outer edges of the leaves, the gold that would be more pronounced in 2 weeks. Raymond had driven on this street before on other road tests because the residential streets in the Whitmore neighborhood had good pavement and low traffic in the mornings and were suitable for the lower speed portion of the verification sequence. He had always found the street pleasant. It was pleasant now, in the objective way that streets are pleasant regardless of what is happening on them, which was a thing Raymond had learned that the world continues to be what it is, while you are standing in it, being subjected to something unjust. The ash trees were still ash trees. The September morning was still clear and cool. The morning had not changed to match the situation. He thought about the differential, which had been quiet at 67. He thought about the carburetor, which had fed the engine correctly through the entire test run, which meant the rebuild had been done correctly, which he had known, but which the road test confirmed. He thought about William's father driving this car off a dealer lot in 1974, and about what it had meant to that man to drive it home, and about what it meant to William to have it maintained correctly 7 years after his father's death. He thought about 38 years of cars that had come to him with problems and had left without them. He thought about the documentation on the seat of the car behind him, which described everything that needed to be described about why he was driving this car on this street at this time of morning. He thought the documentation is there. The documentation is correct. The documentation is going to be reviewed, and it is going to say what it says, and this is going to be resolved. He thought about calling William when the car was back at the shop, because William always answered his phone on the first ring when it was Raymond's number, and always said, "Tell me good news." He was going to have good news for William. He was also going to have this story to tell, and he was going to document it the way he documented everything, which was completely and in the correct order. Date, time, location, officer's name, badge number, sequence of events. He was composing it already in the way he composed work orders, starting at the beginning and moving forward through what had happened without editorializing because the facts were the argument, and the argument did not require editorializing if the facts were complete. The second unit arrived at 8:58 11 minutes after the stop. An officer named Carter, who was older than Yates by at least 10 years, and who took one look at Raymond in his coveralls with the shop logo and said quietly to Yates, "Has he provided documentation?" Yates said, "I asked him to wait." Carter said, "Sir, I'm Officer Carter. Can you tell me what you have?" Raymond said, "I have a work order for this vehicle, a dealer repair license, my personal driver's license, and the vehicle owner's contact information. The vehicle belongs to Dr. William Osei, who lives at and gave the address from memory, because Raymond had a good memory for the details on work orders, because he had trained himself to have a good memory for the details on work orders, because the details mattered, and he had always believed they mattered. "May I get the documents from the front seat?" Carter said, "Yes, sir. Go ahead." Raymond reached into the car and retrieved the 3 documents and handed them to Carter. Carter looked at them. He looked at the dealer repair license, which was current and bore the same name as the work order and the same shop address as the plate registration. He looked at the work order, which had William Osei's name and signature and described this car precisely and listed the repair services completed over the previous 6 days and bore Raymond's signature at the bottom. He looked at Raymond's personal license. He said, "I'm going to call the vehicle owner." Raymond said, "The number is on the work order. He answers on the first ring." Carter called. Raymond watched him. He saw Carter's posture change the specific shift of a person who has been given information that confirms what the documentation said and who is doing the internal calibration that the situation now required. He was still on the phone with Carter when the white SUV turned onto Ashby Street. Raymond recognized the vehicle. It was William Osei's personal car. The white SUV he drove to the hospital and back, the one he kept immaculate because his father had kept his cars immaculate, and some things you inherit without choosing to. Raymond watched it pull to the curb 20 feet behind the cruisers, and he watched William get out in dark trousers and a light blue shirt and his hospital identification badge still hanging at his collar on its lanyard. He had been at the hospital on weekend call coverage and had driven directly from the parking structure when Raymond had answered the phone and said, "I'm on Ashby Street. The car is fine." He had said the car is fine first because he knew William's first thought would be the car, and the car was fine, and William needed to know that before he needed to know anything else. William was 44 years old with his father's height and his father's facility, with silence, and his father's love of this particular car, which he had driven carefully and maintained correctly for 7 years, because it had been his father's car, and because his father had believed that caring for a thing was a form of respect, and that respect was not something you performed only when people were watching. William had taken his father's car to Raymond because Raymond worked the way his father had expected his cars to be worked on, and William had recognized this on the first visit and had not taken the car anywhere else in 5 years. He looked at the situation on Ashby Street with the specific assessment of someone who is trained to read a clinical situation quickly and who has applied that training to the world outside the clinic with equal efficiency. He saw the 2 cruisers. He saw Raymond on the sidewalk. He saw Carter on the phone. He saw Yates to the side. He assessed the elapsed time, which Raymond had told him on the phone, and the documentation status, which Raymond had also told him, and he understood what the situation was and what it required. William said to Carter, "I'm Dr. William Osei. I'm the registered owner of this vehicle, and I authorized Mr. Hutchins to perform a repair and conduct a road test as part of the completion of that repair. He is returning the vehicle to me. I can confirm his identity, the vehicle's ownership, and the service relationship." Carter said, "Dr. Osei, we're verifying the situation now. Thank you for coming." William said, "I have a tracking device on the car. When it stopped in this location for more than 8 minutes, my phone notified me. I called Mr. Hutchins, he told me what was happening, and I drove over. The tracking device installation is noted on the most recent work order. Mr. Hutchins installed it last year as part of a security system service." Carter noted this. It was one more piece of documentation that the situation was exactly what Raymond had said it was. From the beginning. A licensed mechanic returning a customer car after a road test with documentation, with the customer's name and contact information with a tracking device that the customer could independently verify had been stationary on Ashby Street since 8/47. He looked at Raymond. He said, "You all right?" Raymond said, "I'm fine. The car is fine. The differential is fixed." William said quietly, I know you're fine. I'm asking because I'm asking." Raymond said, "I'm fine, William." William nodded. He looked at the Corvette parked on the Ashby Street curb with its dealer plate and its Monza red paint in the September morning light, and he thought about his father briefly, about his father's hands on this wheel, about his father's voice saying, "This is a car that tells you when it's right. if you know how to listen. He had not known how to listen the way Raymond knew how to listen, but he had known how to find someone who did. That was its own form of knowledge. Yates was standing to the side. He had not said anything since Carter arrived with the documentation. He was looking at the work order in Carter's hand and the dealer repair license beside it, and William Osei's hospital identification badge and Raymond's coveralls with the Hutchins Auto Service logo, and he was doing the arithmetic. The arithmetic was simple, and the conclusion was the same one the documentation had been stating since 8:47. Carter said, "You're free to go, Mr. Hutchins." "Dr. Osei, I apologize for the delay." Raymond said, "I'd like the officer's name and badge number, please, for both officers." Carter said, "Of course." He provided both. He also provided his own without being asked. Raymond thanked him. He took the pen from his coverall pocket and wrote both badge numbers on the back of the work order, because the work order was the document he had with him, and the back of it was clean paper, and the documentation needed to be written down now while he was still on the street before the details that people believed they would remember but did not always remember had an opportunity to become imprecise. He got back in the Corvette. He started the engine. He listened to it. The idle was correct. The carburetor was feeding correctly. The 38 years of listening he had brought to this car were being confirmed by the sound the car was making. He pulled away from the curb and drove back to the shop at the speed limit, which was 35 on residential streets, and arrived at Hutchins Auto Service at 9:14. He had been gone from the shop since 8:29. He had been stopped for 27 minutes. He would note this in the documentation because the elapsed time was part of the record. His shop assistant, Marcus Webb, was standing at the bay door when Raymond pulled in. Marcus was 26 years old, 2 years on the job with the particular combination of competence and attentiveness that the best shop assistants develop when they are working for someone who models competence and attentiveness every day. He had grown up in the same district as the shop, and had known of Hutchins Auto Service since he was a child, and he had come to work there at 24 with the intention of learning the trade from the ground up, which Raymond had recognized and had respected and had accommodated by teaching him in the same way Lewis had taught Raymond, not all at once, but in the sequence that made sense, because a person learns a complex trade in the correct order, or they do not learn it at all. Marcus had the particular expression of someone who has been worried and is now relieved. He said, "I saw you get stopped. I was driving back from the parts run on Ashby, and I saw the lights, and I knew immediately what car it was. I pulled over half a block up, and I called the precinct." Raymond said, "I know." Carter mentioned a call came in. Marcus said, "I told them you were road testing a customer vehicle, and that you had the dealer plate and all the paperwork. I gave them the work order number. I had the number memorized because I had filed the intake form." Raymond said, "Thank you. You did correctly." He said it without elaboration because correctly was the word, and it contained what needed to be said. Marcus had seen a situation and had responded to it with the information he had and the channels available to him. He had not panicked. He had not posted before calling. He had called the precinct first with the relevant information and had provided the work order number, which was the document that could be verified against the plate registration. He had done it in the right order. Marcus said, "How long were you there?" Raymond said, 27 minutes. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He said, "I'm sorry." Raymond said, "It's documented. I'll call Patricia this afternoon." He meant Patricia Sims, his attorney, who had handled similar documentation for him twice before, once in relation to a contractual dispute with a supplier, and once in relation to a city permit issue, and who he had called on those occasions because Patricia was good at what she did, and because Raymond understood from 38 years of running a business in this district that the correct response to a thing that should not have happened was to document it correctly and put it in the hands of the person equipped to advance it. You did not absorb it. You did not let it sit in your chest unaddressed. You documented it correctly and in full, and you handed it to the appropriate channel, and then you went back to work, because the work was still there, and the car in Bay 2 still needed to go back to its owner in the afternoon. He parked the Corvette in Bay 2, which was where it had been for 6 days. and he turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet that follows an engine being shut down. The cooling sounds, the tick of metal, settling the particular silence of a car that has been returned to its place after a trip it did not know it was taking. He thought the differential is fixed, the brakes are correct, the fuel line is good, the car is right. He got out. He went to his office, which was a small room at the back of the shop with a desk and a filing cabinet, and a framed photograph of his Uncle Lewis's shop in East Baltimore, taken in 1974, with Lewis standing in the bay door in his coveralls, looking at something outside the frame with the expression of someone who has been doing the correct thing for long enough that the correct thing is no longer remarkable. It is just the thing. Raymond had put the photograph on the wall the first week he opened Hutchins Auto Service because he wanted to see it every day, and because he wanted every person who came into the office to see it too, and to understand from looking at it something about the history that the shop was a continuation of. He sat at the desk. He took the work order from his pocket and smoothed it on the desk surface. He turned it over and looked at the badge numbers he had written on the back in the pen from his coverall pocket in his own handwriting, which was clear and small, and had been the same handwriting for 30 years of work orders. He dated it September, the day and year, the time 8:47 to 9:14. He wrote the time of the stop, the time the second officer arrived, the time William arrived, the time he was released. He wrote the unit number he had noted in the rearview mirror. He wrote the sequence of events in the order they had occurred, with the specificity he applied to everything, not because anyone would ask for it immediately, but because the record needed to be accurate and complete before the details started to blur, and the details always started to blur if you waited. A work order that was incomplete at the end of the day was harder to complete at the beginning of the next day. A work order that was incomplete at the end of the week was largely guesswork. Raymond completed his work orders the day of the work. He had always completed them the day of the work. Today's work order had required an additional page. He held the work order in his hands for a moment when he was done. He thought about the back page, the badge numbers, the times, the sequence. He thought about the front page, the Corvette, the 6, repairs, the 6 days. Both pages were accurate. Both pages were complete. Both pages were the record of what had happened today. The front page was the record of what he had done. The back page was the record of what had been done to him. He put both pages together and held them, and then he put them in his shirt pocket and called William Osei. William answered on the first ring. Raymond said the car is back at the shop. You can pick it up today. William said I'll be there at 4. Raymond said I'm filing a formal complaint this afternoon. I want you to know I'm doing it. William said I know. I'm filing one too. Separately. Patricia Sims. Raymond said yes. William said I'll use my own attorney. 2 separate filings. There was a pause. William said the car sounds right. Raymond said the car sounds right. It took me 6 days, but it sounds right. William said I know it does. I know it does. He arrived at 4:03. He pulled his white SUV into the small parking area beside the shop and walked into the bay through the side door, the way he always entered when he was picking the car up because he liked to see it first. From this angle, the whole car visible across the bay in the afternoon light, which came through the high bay windows at this hour and fell across the Monza red paint in a way that made the color look like something you could put your hand into. He stood in front of the Corvette and looked at it for a moment, not inspecting exactly, acknowledging, confirming that it was still the thing it had always been and that the people he trusted with it had treated it that way. He thought about his father standing in roughly this position in his own garage in 1974, looking at this same car for the first time, assessing it the way his father assessed everything thoroughly without hurry, and then with a satisfaction that was not demonstrative but was absolutely present in the stillness of his expression. He said, "Tell me everything you did," Raymond told him. He went through the work order line by line, standing beside the car, speaking with the precision of someone who has done the work and can account for every part of it. The carburetor, the specific float valve that had been sticking the rebuilt needle and seat the recalibrated mixture screws. The brakes, front and rear, the specific pad compound he had used for the front because the front calipers on a 1969 Corvette respond better to a certain compound in cold weather, and he had been thinking about the winter when he made the selection. The differential, the repack, the specific gear oil specification, the noise at speed that was now absent and why it had been present, and what the absence confirmed about the internal condition of the unit. The fuel line, the hairline cracking at the firewall, what that cracking indicates about the age and condition of the original rubber. The replacement specification. The distributor cap, the service interval. The condition of the contacts, the replacement. William listened with the particular attention of someone who does not fully understand the technical language, but who understands that the person speaking it understands it completely, and who knows the difference between confidence and the performance of confidence. He had seen both in his professional life. He knew which one he was listening to. He nodded at intervals not to indicate comprehension of the technical specifics, but to indicate receipt to confirm that he was hearing what was being said and that it was being recorded in the appropriate way. His father had listened to mechanics this way. William had been told by one of the mechanics who had worked on the car in the 1980s and who was now in his 70s, and who William had found a year after inheriting the car through a chain of referrals that had felt almost like archaeology. When Raymond was done, William said, "What do I owe you?" Raymond said the estimate. He named the figure. William said, "I'm adding 20%. Raymond said, "You don't have to do that." William said, "I know I don't have to. The car is right. You did right by my car, and you stood in the street correctly, and you documented it the moment it was over, and you filed the complaint the same afternoon. All of that is worth 20%. Don't argue with me." Raymond said, "I'm not arguing with you." He took the check and wrote a receipt and put the receipt in the completed file with the work order. That was the last thing the work order required. Everything was in order. The formal complaint was filed with the precinct's internal affairs office on the same Thursday afternoon, an hour after Raymond returned from the stop. His attorney, a woman named Patricia Sims, who had handled 3 prior civil rights matters in the district and who knew Raymond from the community through the neighborhood business association they both belonged to, filed the preliminary document by 4:30. Patricia had asked Raymond on the phone to describe everything in chronological order without editorializing, and Raymond had done so in 4 minutes and 12 seconds because the sequence was already organized in his mind the way a work order is organized, beginning, middle, end, each element in its place. Patricia had said, "Good, this is clean. I'll have the preliminary filing done today." The complaint described the stop in full, the failure to accept or review documentation when voluntarily offered 3 times. In the first 90 seconds, the demand to exit the vehicle before any information had been gathered, the decision to request a second unit before reviewing available documentation, and the total elapsed time of 27 minutes, during which a licensed repair shop operator with current and verifiable documentation was detained on a public sidewalk. The complaint noted the existence of the body camera recording, which Patricia had requested be preserved as of 4:30 that afternoon. The photograph was on social media by 6 in the evening. Marcus Webb had taken it from his van on the parts run from 50 feet away with his phone through the open driver's window before he had called the precinct. He had not posted it immediately. He had called the precinct first. He had called Raymond after Carter released him and confirmed he was on his way back. Then at 5:43, he had posted the photograph Raymond standing on the Ashby Street sidewalk in his coveralls with the Hutchins Auto Service logo, hands at his sides, the Monza red Corvette behind him, and the cruiser with its lights still on visible at the edge of the frame. The caption said, "This is my boss, a master mechanic with 38 years of experience being detained for road testing a customer car. He has all the paperwork. He is 63 years old." Marcus had a following of 1,100 people, mostly automotive industry contacts and former classmates. The post reached 6,000 views by midnight. A regional automotive forum picked it up at 2 in the morning. By Friday morning, it had 40,000 views. A local news station had called the shop by 8. Patricia Sims had issued a statement by 8:30. William Osei had shared the post Thursday evening with a single sentence. "This man fixed my father's Corvette correctly, has done it correctly for 5 years, was detained for driving it on a licensed road test, and was released when I arrived, and confirmed what he had told them from the first minute. He is Raymond Earl Hutchins, and he has been doing this correctly for 38 years. William did not add anything else. He did not need to add anything else. The sentence was accurate and complete, and was shared over the following 24 hours by 11 people with combined followings of over 200,000, including a vintage car. Enthusiasts group with 40,000 members whose administrator posted it with the note. This is what correct professional conduct looks like, and this is what it costs when the system fails to recognize it. The formal review of Officer Yates's conduct was completed over the following 4 weeks. The review examined the recording from Yates's body camera, which captured the full interaction from Yates's approach. The camera had recorded Raymond offering documentation 3 times in the first 90 seconds. The camera had recorded Yates declining to accept the documentation and requesting the second unit without reviewing what was available. The camera had recorded Carter's arrival and the immediate verification of the documents in under 90 seconds. The timeline was clear. The record was complete. The reviewing officers, finding the initial request to exit the vehicle before reviewing offered documentation was premature and not supported by any specific articulable basis. The decision to call a second unit before accepting documentation from a person who had voluntarily offered documentation created a delay that was not warranted by the facts available. Yates received a formal reprimand and was assigned to enhanced traffic stop protocol training. The precinct's vehicle stop procedures were updated to include a specific requirement when documentation is voluntarily offered that documentation must be reviewed before additional units are requested. Raymond received a copy of the finding 4 weeks after the complaint was filed. He read it at his desk at the shop in the 40 minutes between the end of the day's work and the end of the day, when the bay was quiet and the tools were in their places, and the shop had the specific quality of a room that has been used correctly and is now resting. He read it twice, once for the substance and once to confirm that the substance said what it appeared to say. It said what it appeared to say. The finding was accurate. The record was complete. The precinct would update its procedures. Yates would go through training. He filed the finding in the drawer where he kept documents that needed to be kept. The dealer license renewal notifications, the business insurance documents, the certificates of completion for the shop's 4 employees, the letter from the state licensing board commending the shop's compliance record across 19 years of dealer repair operations. The finding went in there not as a trophy, but as a record. It was part of the record of Hutchins Auto Service, and the record of Hutchins Auto Service was the record of 38 years of correct work. And that record included both the correct work and the things that had been done to Raymond despite the correct work, because both were true, and the full truth was what the record was for. He did not post it. He did not share it. The formal record was the formal record. It did not require his amplification to be true. He called his Uncle Louis that evening, which was a Thursday evening in October 6 weeks after the September stop. Louis was 81 years old and still living in the same house in East Baltimore that he had lived in for 40 years, and still had opinions about carburetors and still answered the phone on the second ring. Louis said, "How's the shop?" Raymond said, "The shop's good. I had a situation in September. I wanted to tell you how it resolved." He told Louis the sequence, the road test, the stop, the documentation, Carter's arrival, William's arrival, the filing, the finding. He told it the way he told everything in order without editorializing. Louis was quiet for a moment after Raymond finished. He said, "You all right?" Raymond said, "I'm fine. The car was fine. The differential is fixed. Everything is correct." Louis said, "I know it is. I know." He said, "You documented everything." Raymond said, "Date, time, sequence, badge numbers on the back of the work order." Lewis was quiet again for a moment. The quiet had the quality of a person thinking about something that goes back further than the current conversation. He said, "That's right. That's exactly right. Raymond said I learned it from you. Lewis said you learned it from 38 years of doing it correctly. I just told you to start." There was another pause. Raymond could hear in the background the television Lewis kept on in the evenings, and the sound of Lewis's neighborhood, which had changed in 40 years, the way all neighborhoods change, some things the same and some things different, but the house the same, and Lewis in it, and the shop, memory in both of them. Lewis said the car, the Corvette. "Tell me about it." Raymond told him. He described the carburetor rebuild, the brakework, the differential repack, the fuel line, the distributor cap. He described the road test and what the car sounded like at 67 with the differential correct. He described the sound as precisely as he could because Lewis would want the precision and would understand it. Lewis said, "Good. That's a car worth doing right." Raymond said, "I know it is." Lewis said, "Your daddy would have liked that car." Raymond said, "I know he would." They talked for 11 minutes. Raymond drove home after. He thought on the drive home on Meridian Road on Ashby Street, past the ash trees, about his father, who had not been a mechanic and who had worked for 30 years as a letter carrier and who had maintained his own car in the driveway on Saturday mornings with a meticulous attention that Raymond had watched as a child, and that had prepared him without either of them knowing it was preparation for the thing Raymond would do for 38 years. His father had understood that what you care for, you maintain. What you maintain, you protect. What you protect, you extend. He had applied this to the family car and to his children and to the house on the street where Raymond had grown up, and when Raymond had started sweeping floors in Lewis's shop at 17, his father had said, "Good. Learn it right." He had learned it right. The Corvette went back to William Osei on Thursday afternoon at 4:03 and was driven home to William's garage on Chestnut Hill and parked in the bay where it belonged next to the oil stain on the concrete floor that had been there since William's father's time, and that William had never had cleaned because it was a record of all the years the car had spent in that space, being cared for by people who understood that some things are worth maintaining, that the maintenance is a form of love, and that love done correctly is invisible to anyone who does not know what they are looking at, and completely evident to anyone who does. The formal review of Officer Yates's conduct was completed over 4 weeks. The review board had the body camera recording which had captured the full sequence from Yates's approach to Carter's release of Raymond, including the 3 instances in the first 90 seconds, during which Raymond had offered documentation, and Yates had not accepted it. The board had Raymond's account, Patricia Sims's filing Carter's supplementary report, and William Osei's statement. They had also received a statement from Marcus Webb describing his observation from 50 feet away and his call to the precinct, which had been logged at 8:51, 4 minutes after the stop and 7 minutes before Carter's arrival. The reviewing officer's finding was issued on a Tuesday morning in October and sent simultaneously to Patricia Sims and to the precinct's records department. The findings stated the initial request to exit the vehicle made before any offered documentation had been reviewed was not supported by any specific articulable basis and represented a departure from the department's vehicle stop protocol. The failure to accept voluntarily offered documentation during the first 90 seconds of the stop created an unnecessary delay and an escalation that the available documentation, if reviewed, would have immediately resolved. Officer Yates received a formal reprimand and was assigned to enhanced vehicle stop protocol training. The precinct's vehicle stop procedures were updated to include a specific requirement when a vehicle operator voluntarily offers documentation. That documentation must be reviewed as the first step in any subsequent verification process. Raymond received a copy of the finding. He read it at his desk. He noted that it said what it said and that what it said was accurate. He filed it in the appropriate drawer. Marcus received a commendation from Patricia Sims's office, which noted that his call to the precinct with the work order number had contributed to the factual record of the stop. Marcus pinned it to the bulletin board beside his workstation next to the oil change checklist and the torque specification card for the 4 most common import makes. Raymond locked up the shop at 6:23 on the day the finding arrived. The work order for William's Corvette was in the completed file, which was in the second drawer of the filing cabinet where completed orders for the current year were kept before they were moved to long-term storage at year-end. The bay where the Corvette had spent 6 days was clean and ready for the next vehicle, which would arrive tomorrow morning, a 1974 Ford F-100 with a valve train noise that the owner described as a ticking at warm idle that went away above 2,000 revolutions per minute. Raymond had a good idea what it was. He would confirm it tomorrow. The tools were in the correct places. Everything was where it was supposed to be. He drove home the same way he always drove home on Meridian Road to Ashby Street, which was tonight the street where the stop had happened, and which was tonight the same street it had always been. Wide sidewalks, good pavement, ash trees in early October, now showing more color than they had in September, the gold deeper and spreading from the outer edges toward the center of the leaves. He drove it at 35 because 35 was the speed limit on residential streets, and Raymond Hutchins drove at the speed limit because 38 years had taught him that you do not give them anything they do not have to look for. He also drove at 35 because it was the correct speed for a residential street, and he drove the correct speed on residential streets the same way he had driven the correct speed for 38 years of moving through the world in a body that other people read as a reason to watch him. He had understood from his Uncle Louis at 17, and from his father before that, and from 38 years of being exactly who he was in a country that had not always made room for who he was, that the way you protect the record is by not giving them anything to put in it. The record was clean. The record was his. The formal review had confirmed what the documentation had said. The precinct would update its protocol. Yates would go through training. The finding was in the drawer. He drove home at 35. He thought about Louis, who had run a shop in East Baltimore for 41 years and had never once been arrested, but who had been stopped 19 times in those 41 years, and who had written the details of each stop in a notebook that he still had, and who had told Raymond the notebook is not for them. It is for you. So you know the count. So you know you're not imagining it. So you know the count. Raymond had kept his own count. He did not have Louis's 41 years yet. He had 38. He thought he would reach 41. He thought the shop would be there. He thought the documentation would be there. He thought Marcus would be a good mechanic in 4 or 5 years if Marcus kept at it the way he had been keeping at it, and that the shop would outlast Raymond the way Louis's shop had outlasted the decade it was opened in. He arrived home at 6:47. He parked in the driveway. He went inside and made dinner and ate it and did the crossword from the paper, which he completed in 34 minutes, which was not his best time but was satisfactory. He went to bed at 10:12. In the morning he would fix the valve train noise on the 1974 F-100. He had a good idea what it was. He was going to confirm it. He was going to fix it correctly. He arrived home correctly the way he arrived everywhere he went. Subscribe our channel. We find the record and we read what it says. Every time, every badge number, every timestamp, every work order turned to the back of a clean white page, dated, signed, filed in the correct drawer. We do not stop until the record is complete, and the record is correct, and the record is in the place where records go.